Are you an adventurer looking to take your hunt to the next level? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Spartan Forge. On today's episode, I am joined by Chris Weist. In the last few years, Chris has left his home in Pennsylvania to try his hand at public lands in Maryland and Ohio. Last season, Chris brought home 4 bucks between 3 states using different tactics for each. So we break down these tactics based on his stories from a memorable season. On this week's Mountain Buck Monday Story of the Week, we have a story coming out of Pennsylvania from Jordan Kennedy. On November 3rd, I went into a new area that I've never been to before. It was adjacent to a place I've hunted for a while and got permission to hunt this private piece of mountain ground. I picked the right day to go. They have some fields right behind the camp, and then it's just a mountainside that is pretty much all incline the whole way to the top. I found a spot that was as flattened out as I could find, and it was right off an old four-wheeler trail. It's very thick with small saplings, so my windows were small, but a doe brought him in less than 10 yards from me. I still can't believe it. So this is, as I say this with every story that comes in, the Mountain Buck Monday stories, but head over to East Meets West Hunt on Instagram or East Meets West Outdoors on Facebook to check out the pictures of the bucks that I talk about here. And this one is just a truly once-in-a-lifetime buck from Pennsylvania and really anywhere. Super unique rack, just giant deer, pretty cool. Found that flat spot on the side of a steep hill, and the doe brought the buck right to him. So congratulations again, Jordan. And if anybody else has any stories, any mountain buck stories they want to send in, send me an email, beau@eastmeetswesthunt.com. And send in your story, just a short paragraph or so, and some photos. I'd love to be able to share it on future episodes. And in other news, I just wanted to say that I will be again at NWTF, the NWTF show in Nashville this weekend. So if you're listening to this live February 2023, I will be down there with Spartan Forge. So Bill and I will be at the booth. We'll be at a combined booth with the Seek One boys. So all of us will be there. We can walk through some of the mapping. If you have any questions, any sort of things with the app, feel free to stop by and ask, and we can go through and geek out on it a little bit. But I'm excited. I've never been to that show before, so it should be a good time. Other than that, I hope that everyone has a great rest of your week and is taking advantage of some of this nice weather that we've been having in the Northeast and getting out in the woods. All right, Chris Weist, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, what's going on, man?
Nothing much. Just a rainy morning here in Pennsylvania. I can't complain though because it's February and there's not much for snow on the ground, which is pretty rare. How about where you're at?
Yeah, it's been about the same. It hasn't been a very harsh winter here either, so take advantage of the nice weather while you can, for sure.
Yeah. So where are you located at? You're in Pennsylvania as well, correct?
Yeah, it's like west central, so like around Breezewood, Bedford, Lower Altoona, that area.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Yeah, there's Pennsylvania's it's a relatively big state, but it's small at the same time. As far as it's everybody kind of knows each other's areas and where they're at, and I don't know. I love Pennsylvania. It's pretty cool how it can be so spread apart. Or as far as like so diverse as far as the landscape and everything else. I mean, you can go anywhere from having super flat swamps and some farm country to the mountains and everything in between. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's definitely diverse.
Have you grown up here your whole life?
Yeah, yep. Never moved very far from home. My home place is actually I could hit with a baseball from my house right now, so I didn't go very far.
Hey, that's funny you say that because I'm the same way. So I literally
Yep.
I'd have to hit the baseball pretty hard, but I could hit my parents' house yeah, across the road a little ways. So it's kind of funny. I moved away for a while and then came back and ended up yeah, real close to home. So it's funny how that works out. But so let's talk to me a little bit about your background as far as in hunting and just anything else that you think would be pertinent to share with everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think I probably got started just like a lot of guys do, hunting with my dad. He got me into it really early. I probably picked up my first bow when I was like 11 or something like that. Shot my first deer when I was like 12, and then just progressed from there. Can't say it's anything too crazy. Just growing up and getting into it and seeing my dad take his deer and him taking me and showing me those, and then just kind of rolls from there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just
When
love
do you
being in timber.
when do you think like it was like you really felt like you were just all in on it? Because I mean, from talking to you and seeing some things that I mean, like last year you were traveling all over the place and hunting a lot. Like when do you think like you got that passion or like really want to get into it?
I always loved it, but I think once you like arrow your first like good buck, I think that really like sets it off right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so I want to say I was like 16 or 17, probably 17. I think I was
Okay.
17 when I shot my first like I don't know back then like 110-inch buck was like a monster.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's and heck, that's still a great buck for Pennsylvania. It's like, but yeah, I remember when I was a kid and kind of growing up. It was right like when the antler restrictions were starting to be put in place, and they were starting to get some nicer bucks coming through in Pennsylvania and everything. But up until then, it was not. Yeah, 110-inch deer would win buck contests in a lot of places.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, for the longest time, like that was like my goal. Was like if I could kill like a 110, 115 every year, I was like, I feel like I'm a pretty good hunter. But
Yeah.
now it seems like that's all I shot for, growing up until now. So
Yeah, and the thing is, it's funny in Pennsylvania and some of the other states, depending on where you're at. I mean, sometimes there's deer that won't get over that antler size even at an older age class. Like there's I
yeah,
can I can look at my trail cameras and know there's deer that are 6, 7 years old that won't ever be any that will never beat that 120-inch mark. It's just it's an interesting. It's not like some of the Midwest states where no matter what, or I shouldn't say no matter what, that's not always the case, but the majority of the deer kind of go in some, pretty good increments as they go up through age.
yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, there's definitely look at that 100 and any more around here, like that 120 mark is like very common. And then
Yep.
like across like a broad spectrum of age too. Like we have like some big 2.5 year old deer, but then you'll get like a 5 year old deer that's the same size.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really
It's
wide and short points is very common in Pennsylvania, I feel. I
it's
don't know
it's
how
the
it is where you're
Pennsylvania
at,
yeah, it's the Pennsylvania 8-pointer, man. That's
where
exactly
you get
like
those giant 6 points.
yeah. Yeah, that's
Super
it.
common.
Yeah. I always call it that. It's like I'll have it on my camera. It seems like every spot I go to, you'll have at least one of the Pennsylvania 8-pointers. That's just what they are, and that's what they're gonna be. And it's
Yep.
never anything special, but it's just they're cool nonetheless, and not any easier to shoot by any means. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit about last year you had a stellar year, I'm interested to hear first of all, like you traveled what was Maryland, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, kind of keeping in the triangle there, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And is that something you've done for years? Was this past season the first time that you kind of went multiple states? Give me a little bit of a background.
Yeah. So I did Maryland, I think 2 other years, but they were probably like 2 years ago. And the first year I didn't kill anything, and the second year I just shot a doe, and it was just really big mountain ground, hard to hunt. Didn't see a lot of deer. And it's not that much different than PA. But Ohio this year coming will be my third year in Ohio. So the season prior, I had went down there and shot just a 120-inch 9 point for my first year, and then last season, this past season, I shot just a mature 4-year-old buck. But as far as I mean, Pennsylvania's every year,
Yeah.
and then I went to North Carolina a couple times, but that's not public ground. That's like me and my dad and a bunch of our buddies. It's just a small group of us would all go down for like a cheap outfitter hunt. It was
Nice.
basically just to get together and have a good time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I got a
No.
couple of North Carolina bucks.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And what made you decide you wanted to kind of branch out a little bit, outside of the home state of Pennsylvania that you've, hunted for forever?
Probably the Orange Army, a little more opportunity. You know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing with Maryland, to be honest, is just that it opens so early, and then I can really like critique my setup. Like, if you'd walk into Pennsylvania day one, and you're all over the place, gears laying all over the ground, you don't know where stuff's going to. So it kind of gives me a chance to get in the woods early and get my stuff together.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Like the first set, no matter what of the season, no matter where it's
It's a
at, is
jungle
always
mess.
yeah, kind of a mess. You think you got your stuff prepped, you think you have everything ready, but it takes a little bit to get your flow down on getting in and setting up and all of that stuff. So it's definitely I definitely go through that myself, and I've tried to reduce that curve because I feel like in the past, especially like when I first got out of college, it was like I didn't prep things until right before opening night. Half the time I was throwing stuff together. Now I try to, have it, but you kind of forget like, okay, what pocket did I put this in? Or like you're getting up in the tree and you're hanging and they're like, oh, I forgot this. I forgot, there's like little things that you forget usually at the beginning of the hunts, and then by the end you feel dialed, like you can get in and slip right in quietly. You're not banging off, not banging metal together, and I don't know. I think
Oh yeah,
that's a good point.
you get like 3 weeks in and you got your stuff dialed, but those first couple sits are rough.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, cool. So let's just walk through your last season and kind of talk about it a little bit. So when you said you started out in Maryland, but did you just like and you'd hunted it, kind of years prior. Were you going off that years prior knowledge, or did you start like do you do scouting trips in the spring, or how does that look for you? How does your scouting look?
Yeah, so last year I kind of just like made a decision. Like I kind of had a chip on my shoulder with that area because I hadn't killed a buck there yet, but I knew there was bucks there. I had them on camera. So I kind of started like late July, early August, running some cameras and scouting this clear cut. And I had plenty of good bucks hitting this clear cut all August. And even into September, I think, I'm trying to remember, I think Maryland season opens like literally the first week of September. I think it's like September, like, just to say 5th, like right around there somewhere. And wouldn't you know it, just like all the time, I got these bucks coming in, five, six of them in a group every single day, all on the dot, same time. And then like 3 days before the season, boom, they quit showing up. And it's like a jungle mess, trying to figure these deer out all over again. So this clear cut, I'm gonna guess probably 4 to 5 years old. So it's not like 6 foot high, but you probably have like in your open areas, you have like 4 foot just junk grass and then greenbrier patches. And then there's probably, I don't know, 20, 30 trees in the middle just scattered. So basically what I did was I was trying to find these bucks again and figure out what they were doing. So I automatically just started looking for feed trees, looking for white oaks that were dropping. And I'd walked end to end in this clear cut probably 3 times, 4 times. And there was just one specific huge white oak tree in the middle. And I could glass up and see the acorns on it, but it wasn't dropping yet. And I think it took the third time that I went in there and scouted that tree, it started to drop. And then dude, as soon as it started to drop, the sign underneath the tree was just unreal. Like, there was just sign everywhere. So I threw a camera up, and it wasn't like 3, 4 days later. I had almost every buck I had in the summer coming and hitting that tree. And it wasn't always in the daylight, but I knew they were coming there. And like the closest tree to hunt that feed tree was like 35 yards, and it's the what they're out in the wide open. So there's no easy way to like sit in this tree. And I'm like 6'5", so I'm like trying to hide in this small tree. They're out in the
Yeah.
middle of this clear cut, and I forget how many hunts it took me.
Well,
I want
I,
to say like what's
sorry,
that?
sorry to interrupt. I just had a question based off of that. So this white oak was in the middle of the clear cut, like it wasn't
Hmm.
out of it was in the middle there. So like it was like kind of like a select cut where they left some of those seed trees up to be able
Yep.
to drop down. Okay, that makes sense.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's a really difficult thing to get close to the and access in general of like not knowing where those or maybe you did know, but not knowing like where the deer are bedded at within the cut, if they are bedding inside of it, and figuring out how to access to it. And you get in some of those places, and there's just like every so often there's a big tree that you can get into, which it sounds like this
Hmm.
situation, and yeah, you kind of stick out like a sore thumb.
And I might
Yeah,
have got ahead
and
of
you're a big
myself
dude,
a
like
little bit too.
you're 6'5", you're built like you. I don't know how much you weigh, but you're a big dude. Like you're a big guy, so it probably was difficult to hide up there.
Yeah, I didn't feel like I was hidden at all, that's for sure. But I might have even got ahead of myself because I did scout and I found some beds. So the clear cut's on the very top of the mountain, and it's not like hilly or ridgy like Ohio is. It's just like really big mountain ground, and this clear cut's on the very very top. So the deer weren't even bedding on the top in the clear cut. They were bedding on the side, like maybe like two benches down, and it was on an east side. But the deer were actually coming up in the evening to feed on top rather than the opposite coming from the top down to the bottom, which made it kind of hard on top because you got that west wind coming over the top and they're on the east side. So as soon as they pop up over the side, then it's like bam, they got you.
Yep.
And I just got fortunate enough that the evening I killed my buck, he come wind the tail from the west side into that tree. I think I hunted it 3 times, and I had seen probably, I don't know, 10, 12 deer, just does and small bucks. But we had a front moving in, I think like the next morning, and I think it just got that buck up in time because I shot him like the last 10 minutes of daylight. He come into that tree.
Okay, gotcha. And so he didn't come from the east side, like he came
Mm-mm.
from the opposite direction. Do you think he might have been laying in the cut, or do you think he was just like laying on the other side of the ridge?
That at that time, I think he was bedded in the cut on the west side, which definitely threw me off. I didn't expect it because you'd have thought he'd have been on the east side with the wind to his back and have visual downhill, but he actually come from the opposite side. But on the opposite side, there's also like township road, so maybe he just using that as visual bedding. He had the wind
Yeah.
coming to his face, but he could see down too. But he just got up and turned around and come wind to tail to the tree.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And when in that situation you're talking about there, that's difficult. But I find that often where they're coming up to feed, like if there's an area that's big woods or mountainous that has ag in the bottoms, usually that seems like then they're coming down. But I think more times than not, I find either the cuts that are on the top or even like the oak, the big oak stands are on the top of the ridges, and they're kind of coming up. They're waiting for those thermals to switch, at the last 45
Yep.
minutes of light, and then coming up over and coming to feed. It is difficult. It's like you're trying to cut that wind just off. You know what I mean? Like, and it doesn't always stay consistent. So that's where it's difficult because it's you'll get gusts from different directions, even though it's calling for a west wind. But
Hmm.
it's a tough game to play, and it's definitely risky. But I like your standpoint of kind of just. I mean, that's what you have to work with, and that's probably your best odds of killing them and spooking them really at the same time.
Yeah. And just like a side note, when with my setup on that tree, there was like almost a small, I want to say divot, or maybe it's not a ditch, it's like a small, just a dip in the mountain right below that tree. And I knew they were coming up in that low point from the east side, and I just had that just off wind, like it was between me and the tree. So I knew even though the wind was blowing towards the bedding, I was just on that off wind. But I mean, all the does come out of that dip. But like I said, for whatever reason, he must have been using that visual bedding on the west side.
Mm.
So I actually found a lot more success on the big mountain, on the off winds, not like having a true wind to their face or their tail. It's just like, I feel like it's an off wind. When you have the wind and he has the wind both, then you're like in the best situation.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the last two bucks that I've killed in Pennsylvania were that way. Like he had the wind in his favor, and I was just off enough that like it
Yep.
was it was like I don't know, if he could have came 15 minutes earlier or 20 minutes later, it might have been wrong, because it's it starts going back and forth a little bit, kind of like a sail, and
Yep.
and it's risky, but that's a great tactic for being able to get on them there. And so, how was your access? Like, how did you get into that spot?
That actually, it wasn't that hard, if I'm being honest. It was actually a really, really easy walk, but it's super low pressure area in archery season, so it just had not been bothered at all. I just kind of got lucky in that aspect. I mean, it's really low pressure early bow season. In that particular area, I think it's really high pressure gun area.
Okay. And like, did you walk at that point? Did you come in with the wind in your face, or how were you accessing that your stand?
So there's just like an old logging, like a two track, and I was just walking that two track in, and so the wind was blowing towards the bedding, but I wasn't to the bedding yet. So my wind was blowing in their direction, but behind them. I mean, I wasn't to them yet for them to catch my wind.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. And then when that buck was coming in, and did he ever look up at you? You said you were kind of sticking out. Like, did he ever look up, or was it he was pretty comfortable where he was at, and probably without a lot of pressure?
He was pretty comfortable, especially like it was like that last 10 minutes, and there was a couple other deer there. I'm sure having those other deer there made him feel better about the situation. Now, I think if it was him by himself and he was coming in, he'd have probably been a little more on edge. I'd see that a lot. If you have a group of deer, a more mature deer is, I'll say, more comfortable. You know what I mean? Coming
Yep.
coming in when there's more deer already there.
Yeah, and they use those does and the young bucks as like test dummies. Like they throw them out
Decoys.
there. Yeah, decoy. Make sure there's no danger ahead, and then it's definitely more likely for them to come in after that. I totally agree with that, and also I feel like it probably when you're in those types of cuts, even though you do stick out like that, when you have the brush that's like at their head level, they seem to feel more comfortable than if it was just like an open field, that they were coming through, and you were in an open tree or just like open hardwoods, say you're on like an oak stand and there's no branches going up and you're just in this oak tree sticking out like crazy. But I feel like in those cuts, when they have that brush and the briars and everything that are kind of, making them feel secure in there, they're not as apt to look up unless someone's did something and spooked him before in there. But other than that, I feel like you can get away with a little bit more.
Yeah, and that deer, I think the night before I sat in my lone wolf, and I feel like it really stuck out. Like the hang on in the tree stuck out really bad. So the next night when I went in, I was in my saddle and I just sat on the backside of the tree. So I think that helped a lot too.
Yeah, that definitely would help out quite a bit. And so how far was the shot then? You said it was 35 yards to the
Yeah.
feed tree. Is that right
Yep.
where he was at?
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. 35.
That's pretty
Kind
cool.
of
And
kind of had to shoot when I could because I don't want to run out of light either.
yeah, no, that makes sense. And so like on that hunt, you said that was early September at that point, or what time was that?
Yeah. So that tree started dropping between the 18th and the 23rd. So it was probably right around the 23rd when I shot
Mm,
him. Yep.
okay, nice.
Yeah,
No,
because
that's
I think I had like 2.5 solid weeks of hunting him before I killed him.
okay. Gotcha. And how were you doing that? Were you like going in like couple days at a time, like, or I know we were talking before we got on here. You work night shift, so were you
Hmm.
like going like after work and going out and hunting, or how did that kind of work for you?
During the season, I was actually on a different shift. I was on like 4 to 12 shift, so I would go and hunt the mornings mainly, and then just hunt the evenings on the weekend. But and it's not that far from my house. I might have like a 35-minute drive to Maryland from here.
Okay.
So I just kind of made it down whenever I could, whenever I had extra time.
Yeah.
And I would go down every chance I could and just can get some boots on the ground and do my scouting.
Yeah, no, that's pretty awesome that yeah you were able to find that feed tree and what was the acorn crop like in general? Was it like that was the tree, like there wasn't that many that were dropping, or was there quite a few and it just so happened they were going there?
Yeah, so I basically checked every white oak tree that was in that clear cut because I mean they stick out like a sore thumb. I could glass one end to the other and just see them all, and then go walk to them and check them. And some of the bigger ones were dropping, but it wasn't crazy. You know, they might be dropping a handful here, a handful there, but this one giant one was just dumping them. I mean, when you were sitting in the stand, they were hitting the ground the entire time that you were sitting in the tree, just raining them. So, I mean, obviously, I think that's what made it such a hot spot.
Man, that's such an important thing to note too, of like checking those trees and like paying attention to it. And, it took you some time, before, when you're scouting down there and checking those trees to be able to figure out which one dropping the most. And, I hear, one of the most things that I get asked as far as questions is like, what do you do when there's multiple oak trees that are dropping, and like figuring out, and I think you kind of answered that a lot, is like trying to they don't all drop at the same time. If they do, yeah,
Yep.
that becomes a problem. But like, as far as if you can find where ones are really like hot at that moment, and heck, a week later that might not have been the case, and it might have been a completely different tree that was doing that.
Yep. No, I agree. And then once you find those trees specifically like that, within a couple of days of when they're dropping, you take that note, write the date when they started dropping, what tree it is. You have that like on your own X or your notes or whatever. You save a lot of boot time and a lot of pressure that you're putting on that ground yourself for the next season. You could hold off until within that 3 or 4 day period and then go check it then the next year without walking all over the place and putting unnecessary pressure on it.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And do you find that pretty typically as far as like certain trees drop around the same time every year?
I don't quite have it down with science like that just yet, but
Yeah.
that's something that I'm looking into, taking more
Yeah.
notes on stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I think that's something that I have not done as far as like wrote down the notes as far as when the trees are or when the acorns are dropping, and trying to correlate kind of a plan. Like I've done that with
mm,
does, like when you find doe groups that tend to come into heat at certain times, and they seem to correlate there. But I think that's really valuable. At least it'd be a good thing to test and pay attention to, and like you said, write down the notes, because anytime you can write down notes and look back on historical data, I feel like even though that it might not always line up perfectly, it gets you in a lot better starting place than you were the previous year.
absolutely. And I don't know how it is up your way. I was just talking to a couple of my buddies about this the other day. I would almost rather Pennsylvania season open 2 weeks earlier than have like that 2 weeks on the back end towards Thanksgiving. I'll tell you what, man. I mean, I'd kill a good one every single year if that was the case. They're so much more patternable, and if you have a good acorn year, like early season setups, I find a lot of really good early season setups around this area.
Yeah, and honestly too, like same. I don't want to say the same, because those last 2 weeks are like also my favorite. So like I'd rather like
Yeah,
remove 2 weeks in October and still keep the back end and add it on the front. But September is such a patternable time. Like even in the big woods,
absolutely.
you can find some actual patterns. And it feels like once October hits, it's a lot more scattered as far as trying to figure that out. Like even like throwing oak trees out of the mix. Cherry trees are big in some of the areas that I hunt, and when black cherries are dropping, you find trees that are dropping black cherries, man, they are scooping them up, but they're typically gone by the first week of the season. And it's and so like I'll have so many pictures in like really like the September 13th to like the 25th, like in that period, I have a lot of good daylight buck movement. Like once they move from kind of wherever they're hanging out in the summer and their velvet sheds, you find like that next transition zone, and I feel like they're just way more comfortable at that time. And who knows,
Yeah,
maybe once that you add pressure to the mix of everyone hunting at that time of year, maybe that changes. I don't know, but I wouldn't mind trying it.
I think it definitely like depends on the area you're into. Like I feel like everybody has the best success in like different areas, different types of terrain. But my thing here is like we got that stinking muzzleloader bear season now, which is good for the bear hunters. I like to see some more bears taken because I think they are do become an issue. But you got guys out here, they're putting on 20-man drives in the middle of October for bears and muzzleloaders, and you can't tell me that doesn't hurt the pressure on the deer.
Yeah.
That makes it 10 times harder before rifle season gets here and all that stuff.
Yeah, I know. I like the idea of extending the bear season, and I do like the idea that bear hunters get more of an opportunity rather than the 3-day rifle season that they had, before, and now archery's extended too. But it, from a deer hunter standpoint, it sucks. Like it definitely
Yeah,
sucks
definitely.
because it throws everything off when, yeah, you have those big groups of people coming through. And again, that's their right to do it, and I completely understand it. But it sucks from a deer hunter standpoint because it definitely puts them on alert, and it almost seems like it's made that October 20th to 25th where I used to do pretty well with daylight activity of bucks. It slowed it down the last few years, in my opinion, and it takes almost like, once you give them about a week to settle down again, and their testosterone levels are jumping up, and they start being a little more careless towards the rut, where then it becomes a little bit normalized again. But yeah, I've
Yeah.
definitely seen
Yep.
that as a trend. For sure. And so after Maryland, what was did you go back to PA or what? Because I remember seeing like a post that you had that, you had shot like $3 by sometime in the beginning of October. So kind of walk me through where your next step went there.
Yeah. So from Maryland, then I harvested my buck in PA for the first week of season in PA. It was October 7th.
Okay.
And I know we talked about like the different, basically like the different types of tactics. And I kind of felt like I used four different ones for the 4 bucks I killed. So I definitely like considered the Maryland buck like a feed tree, like using the acorn crop. And it plays in a little bit to my PA buck as well, but I was really hunting more of like him coming off his bed and just trail cam data. So this is just an area that I've been in for probably 5 years, and it's just a small chunk of public, and there's like a dairy farm on the low end of it. So you have ag. There's a lot of alfalfa stuff down there, and me and one of my other buddies was in this area running cameras, and we got this thing on camera in velvet. And at that point, that was the biggest buck that I had on camera in Pennsylvania. So I was like, well, looks like that's the one this year. And we just, as soon as we got the first picture in August, we spent that whole day. We're like, we're going to do it. So let's just jump into this thing. We're going to put boots on the ground for like 3 hours, do what we have to do to find where he's bedding at, put the cameras up, and then we're going to get out and maybe check it one more time before we come to hunt. And that's what we did. And we found where the deer were bedding at and what we thought was his bed and how he was exiting and coming back in. And I snuck back in probably about 6 days before the PA opener and checked the cameras, and he was still in there. And it seemed like he had shifted a little bit, but at that point, I didn't want to go search for his bed a second time because I don't want to put that unnecessary pressure on him. And but I still had enough data where I made a mock scrape in there, and he was coming past that and kind of checking that out. And I was actually in Ohio for the Pennsylvania opener, and my buddy went in to hunt him, and opening morning missed him
Oh,
at like
no
40
way.
at like 40 yards. Yeah. And I had made this joke. He texted me. He was all worked up. He's like, "Oh man, I just missed him. I just messed it up." And I texted back. I was like, well, yeah, it looks like I'll have to go kill him for you now. And it was just a big joke. And I'm trying to think.
So
I went
I,
in.
before you go to there, I want to ask a little bit about like your strategy on finding his bed. Like what did that
Mhm.
what did the area look like where the deer were bedding in his specific bed? So just give kind of the listeners a visual, paint a picture of kind of what it looked like.
Okay. Yeah. So this area is a little bit different. Um, it's not, there's a steep hillside, but they weren't going the whole way up. They were bedded like on the low half of it. And what makes this area different is there's a lot of just vegetation. And once that vegetation gets a frost and it dies, then the deer just completely like move out of there. As soon as the vegetation dies, then they just completely move out. And I know that just from like years past. Um, but there's like some small ditches and it kind of rolls. And then there's like low spots where the ditches are, is where all like the thick vegetation is. And he was actually the bed that he come from when I did kill him. He was bedding in one of those ditches, just as high as the ditch would go, and he was like right in a little pocket. And these ditches are only uh 15 yards wide, maybe, but they're like kind of long. So
Yep.
like up and down the mountain, he's in this like thin strip of vegetation is what he's bedding in, and so that's why we was in there hunting so early, so hard, so early, because I knew, after that like second week, if we'd have got a cold snap, then that stuff would have died, and he'd have probably moved his or shifted his bedding again.
Okay, so it was just like, was it like a lot of viney type stuff or bushes or something that was kind of when you said thick vegetation that was like through those ditches? What do you know what it was?
It's like a mix of greenbrier and grass. Like there's, I don't even know what type of grass it would be. It's just like about 4 foot tall, and it's kind of swampy in there. So it's just,
Okay. No, that makes sense. I'm always curious on like when, especially the early season, it can be difficult when there is a lot of vegetation to narrow down bedding, and it almost seems like, that deer from me listening to your story, like if his like primary food was like down in that dairy farm or going down there, and then instead of using like specific terrain type vegetation, he was using the vegetation standpoint of like cover and security more than anything, and then but still being relatively close to the food that he could get down to. Does that sound about right?
yeah. So what he was doing was when he come out of his bed, there was some white oaks in there dropping. It was nothing crazy, but I mean, he'd be hitting that first food source would be acorns. He would stage up there, eat acorns, and then once it got dark, then he would move down to the big ag fields, because the big ag fields are kind of close to a hard road. So I know he's not going down there until it's pitch black.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So when you went in after your buddy missed him, explain like kind of how you went in and how you hunted him based off that bed.
And so I put 3 sits on him before we actually killed him. The next set, I just went based off of where my buddy sat and missed him. I went in the morning. He missed him on the morning set, so I went back in on the morning when I got back from Ohio about 4 days later, and sat maybe like 25 yards further over than he did, because he said he'd come up like 40 yards from him. So I just closed the gap a little bit. I just seen one small buck that morning, and I was just trying to cut that. I was using a terrain, one of the ditches, and there's a small point that runs down. I was kind of just trying to look at the map and from what he explained to me, and just cut the gap from where he was coming from the feed back to his bed. And I knew the general direction of where he was bedded at. And then the next 2 sits, I actually seen the buck, and those were evening sits. So I took my trad bow with me on the third sit, and I just got right in tight over top that scrape, my mock scrape that I made. And I had plenty of pictures of him going past that camera, but it wasn't every single day. So I kind of had a feeling he was off this side just a little bit. And apparently he was using an exit trail that I had no idea he was using, because that evening I was watching the direction I thought he was going to come from, and he actually came about 60 yards slower than I expected. And so there's this little 6 point leading, and the 6 point, I mean, he come right under my platform, and the 10 point was right behind him, like maybe 30 yards in between them. And I was like, "There's no way I'm going to kill this deer with my trad bow right now." And
Yeah.
I'm ready, and like, he's going to come right underneath the tree. What you know, for whatever reason, this 6 point hits my boot trail and just freaks out. He just completely hits the floor and turns and runs. And then obviously the big one wasn't going to commit at that point.
Yeah.
So they just kind of hung out. Like they didn't know what happened. They didn't smell me, nothing like that. They were just weirded out. And then he went back into where he come from. And I basically just waited until the next good wind. And then me and my buddy both went in. And I was like, for whatever reason, this deer is super killable because he's still staying true to his roots. And I was like, you sit here. I was like, I'm gonna go down to where he come out last time. It's gonna be 50-50. So one of us is gonna kill him. And then that evening, about 15 minutes or so before dark, I had a 4 point come in. And dude, I'm telling you, I was in a tree like this big. Like that's just all that was there. It was like a little pin oak
So
that I
like
had
an
to hang
8-inch
on.
diameter tree, just like a
Absolutely. Oh yeah. And I was only probably 8-9 foot off the ground because that's just as high as I could get without starting to break like dead branches off. And I knew I was close to him, so I don't want to make any more noise. So I'm just like, this 4 point's walking by like 10 yards, and I got my bow in front of my face, just like following him, just
yeah.
praying to God he doesn't pick me out. I don't know how I got away with it, but he went cruising by, and it wasn't even 2 minutes. And then I seen him coming, and he got behind a little bit bigger tree. I drew, and he come right to 12 yards, and I just shot him right there, like 8-9 foot off the ground. So he was pretty close.
Oh man, did you shoot him with your trad bow?
No, I'm kicking myself for it. I had my trad bow, and I was super stoked about it because I almost killed him. But because I'm like in like a slow transition of going completely trad,
Mhm.
but I still catch myself in those moments where I'm like, I should just take my compound and
Yeah.
just be done with it. And so I took my compound, and he comes in 12 yards, and I kill him. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah. Oh, that's really funny. So how did he come in? So like were you like kind of below him on the mountain as far as like where you think he was bedding at, and he was like kind of coming down at that point?
Well, I knew he was kind of like just above us, but out from us. Like he was going to come down and then kind of like J hook to his right to
Y-
us is how he
Okay.
was using the terrain. And I just knew spitball. He was about 60 yards below me. That was a Monday night when I seen him with my trad bow. And then Friday, it was the next day we had the wind to hunt him. And it kind of like, so you got your ditch, the vegetation, and then it follows a point and it comes and joins the hollow. It comes to a point. And I knew I didn't want to be below the point. So I picked out the best tree, probably like 25 yards from the end of it. And I kind of figured he would cross like the very end of it. And he walked right to the tree. Like he was going to probably brush my tree as he walked past. So I think I just ended up picking that tree perfect is all that was.
Oh man, that's awesome. That and I'm sure it helped like learning that area over the last 5 years of like understanding how they're bedding versus vegetation. And like, I harp on that all the time is like, I look at every area as like a 3-year plan. Like it's going to take me at least 3 years to really feel good about any spot
Absolutely.
that I go
Yep.
into. I love walking new areas. Like that's one of my favorite things because it's just like the unknown of just like, you don't know what you're going to find. But if I want to be successful, it's like really finding spots that you put time in years and you start really micro learning these little nuances of each area, because each area has its own little things, its own little kinks in the way the deer use the land and use the terrain. And like you can put rules of thumb on a lot of things, and then you just got to tweak it, based off of the different areas.
No, I absolutely agree. Yeah, it definitely takes a couple of years to really fine tune an area.
Yeah.
That's probably one of my like downfalls. I have like a really bad habit of I'll hunt an area and I'm like, all right, well nothing's happened here, so I'm gonna go over here now and sit. And like I don't spend enough time I talked to Ryan about this a bunch of times. I told him, I was like, one of my goals for this year is I just need to be where I know I need to be and stick to it and not get bored with it and move, because that kicked me in the butt last year in Ohio a couple times. I wasn't in the tree that I was supposed to be in, and I knew better.
Yeah. And man, I did the same thing in West Virginia last year. Like literally I found this spot in October. It was like it was a topo funnel where three ridges met at one point. There's a giant scrape there. I was like, when I come back in November, I need to sit here for 3 days. Like if I sit there for 3 days, there's a really good chance that I can kill a buck or at least have an opportunity. What do you know? Didn't do exactly what I'd planned, and what did my cameras tell me? That I screwed up. And
You
literally
should have been there. Yep.
3 of the 4 days I was hunting there, a buck that I would have shot came by through there at some point during the day, and I'm like, it's just it's one of those things. But it was like a newer area, and I was like, I wasn't as confident as I should have been in that. It made sense in my head, but I didn't have like that data or like any past experience to really tell me that it was going to happen, and that really bit me. So tell me a little bit about your Ohio experience there.
Oh, that was a long year.
Let's hear
I
it.
I probably had well, definitely started at like this time last year. I was down and shed hunted and was checking points for betting and all that, and kind of found a couple areas that I really liked, and ended up getting some really really big bucks over the summer on camera, which is always gets you excited. But of course, how it always is, you get the big ones on camera up until September, and then they're like gone in the thin air, and you never see them again. But I ended up spending like 22 days in a tree down there until I finally killed one. And like I said, it was just a lot of chasing my own tail. I should have been sitting in spots that I knew better. And I can't even tell you how many times that bit me. Like so many times that I was just like, man, you gotta get your crap together. Because I even had one, like a couple of my buddies were like, I don't even, you have so many pictures of bucks. I don't even know how you just stoop into one by accident. I was like, you're preaching to the choir, man. Like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. But I did have some really good encounters around that, like November 10th and 11th was like the best 2 days I had all year. Um, on the 10th, I had two bucks probably in like the 30s, between mid and high 30s, chasing does. Like two of them, one was at 8 in the morning, and then one was at 11. And right there, perfect example. For whatever reason, these two bucks are chasing does all over the place. Common sense will tell you, hey, I should probably stick a couple of days in this tree. There's hot does here. What I do, move to a different spot. Even though the next day on the 11th, I had an encounter with the biggest one that I've seen of the season. It's probably like mid 40s, 10. And I really like the story on this buck because I had this buck on camera. I mean, maybe only 5 times throughout the year. He would just like pop in and then leave. I had him in velvet on this specific ridge that I seen him, and that's the only time that I had ever had him on camera on that ridge. And I feel like it was one of those situations where he like shows up in the summer, checks it out, and then wherever he falls at, he like tends those there, and then comes back to check that summer area. Like he was cruising that same ridge that he was at in the summer, and I was just off by like 30 yards. Like he was like 50 yards, and I don't know, man. I shoot 50 all the time, but I'm just not a guy to be flinging an arrow 50 yards to the timber.
Yeah.
So
No, not that makes sense. And what did it look like? Like where did he cross that you were just off? Like was it like a certain terrain feature? What was he kind of running at that point?
and actually, it wasn't even that I went in and was off just because I picked the wrong tree. I actually waited until like 9 o'clock in the morning to sneak into the spot, and I actually snuck up on a herd of does feeding, and I just let them feed their way off. And I'm thinking, man, I should set up right where those does were and just sit. So I was like 50 yards above a logging trail, and it was on a north face, and there's a great big ditch on the low side of this log road. So anything that comes from the left or right crosses at the top of that ditch on the log road. So it just makes like the perfect spot. and I was 50 yards above it because I was sitting where these does were. But also, you don't think about this stuff in the moment. But I set up in that tree. This buck's cruising this trail, and I was like debating on shooting, but I decided not to. And I was like grunted at him to get him to stop, and it like freaked him out, and I messed the whole thing up. But if I'd have thought about it longer, I guarantee you that buck was already probably trailing those does that were beside my tree. And if I'd have never said anything, I bet you that buck would have circled right to my tree.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, idiot.
Yeah. And how many
And you
times
never,
it happens all the time, and you in the season, like when you look back, hindsight, 2020, but it's so hard to make those correct decisions until I'm sure the next time that happens, that'll be fresh in your mind, as far as like,
oh
maybe
yeah,
I should wait a little bit before I grunt at them or do whatever. But man, those tops of those ditches like that, those are some of my favorite spots to set up during the rut, because it's like it's a natural funnel. I mean, like if you think of like ag land, it's like people that hunt like fence rows, like it's kind of like that. But even though it looks like just big unbroken timber, the way that terrain funnels them down, man, it can really be good.
yep. Yeah, it's a really good spot. The only thing I don't like about that, even though I watched a mature buck do it, is it's fairly open in that spot. So I've already done this. I've already been in there and did all my scouting in that spot because it's like one of my main spots I'm going to be in this coming season. It's like it's not a doe trail. It's a real faint cruising trail. Like the ones that are like really hard to stay on. You got to like really take your time and just catch the small sign as you go.
Yep.
So it come around that ditch, goes around another point, and cuts another ditch. And I only went further out just because my access is a lot easier and foolproof. And to get to where I was, I feel like I was messing a lot of deer up on the way in. So I'm going to reroute my access this next season. And I already have a tree and everything picked out. It's a lot thicker too on this hillside. So I feel like they're going to be more comfortable coming through that area.
Yeah. And how do you access those types of spots? Do you like go up the ditch like in the morning coming up, or do you go up the point? Like what's your kind of thought on access for it?
That morning I come from the south side and I just climbed the whole ridge and then creased the top and went down over the other side.
Yep. Okay.
But I feel like there's a lot of deer between where I was parked and where I walked on that south side. Like I get a lot of pictures of deer in there. I can't say that I did bust a lot of deer out, but in the back of my head, I felt like they just seen me from a mile away and they were probably running everywhere. So but I know how I rerouted my access for next year that I'm going to probably spook very, very few deer compared to what I thought I was. So
Okay. And what
makes
is
me
your
feel
new
better about
access?
it.
What does your new access look like? What's different about it?
So there's a really long running ridge, and instead of walking up the side of the ridge, increasing the top, I'm going to come from the top, but way, way like probably a mile and a half from the side and come in. And it's like a hiker's trail. So it comes out the top and it actually goes down over the north side. And I'm going to go down over the north side and then cut out the side again and come up below the trail, the cruising trail.
Okay. Gotcha.
And
No,
then
that's
all
good.
that, like where all the bedding is at, is further out and then above me. So I'm basically below the cruising trail and he'll be cruising below the bedding on that north side, catching the thermals coming down from the top.
Ah, gotcha. No, I like that. And how many
Yep.
times, like, when you're hunting, like, some of those kind of, like, side hills like that, it's always the hardest thing is, like, do you go above the trail or do you go below the trail? And, and for me, it depends. Like, if I'm hunting, mornings or evenings like that type, I usually try to be below the trail, even though it kind of sucks because you're almost at eye level depending on the steepness of it, and that's
Mhm.
where it's like nice to be behind the tree, or the way that you think they're coming, even though it's kind of makes you pucker a little bit because it's a big drop off behind you where you're up. You might only be 8 feet up in the tree, but you got a 50-foot drop off, down behind you. But like there's sometimes with some of those ditches, if it's like a spot where I think that they're going to be cruising more like mid morning or like, into the afternoon, then I'll set up above the trail and try to take advantage of the uphill thermals and, that kind of way. But it's all very situational, but there's never, I struggle with it even myself of like when I go in, I usually like pick a tree for each scenario and then wait until that time to kind of decide which one
Yeah.
that I'm gonna go in and hunt.
I think when I get into those situations when I'm on a really steep hillside, I just try to pick a tree like right on the trail. I want to be high enough where I'm not getting picked. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think that's best case scenario for me anyhow, how I hunt. You just have to shoot left or right, I guess. I'm not afraid to take those frontal shots. I know some guys are, but I have like a 31-inch draw, and my airs are like 550 grains, so I've never had an issue.
yeah. No, that make whatever you're comfortable with your setup and
Yeah,
you know
but
where the
they got to
vitals
be
are and
close. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah, they got to be like under 20, but that's
Yeah.
how I like them.
No, that's exactly right. I love the close. I mean, I think most of my setups are kind of made for that. Like, there's not too many of my setups where I can shoot a whole lot further. Um, yeah, my buck in PA this last year was 12 yards, similar to yours. Like, it was just like
Yep.
it was a chip shot, and I love that. Now, the year before, I had 14-yard chip shot, and I missed, completely airballed it, which is terrible, and then ended up getting him on the second shot, but. It but I guess the moral of the story is like I like that too of like close, try to get impersonal with them. Man, it just feels so good when you get that close to a mature buck because it's like to get that close to him, you feel good about yourself and your plan to be able to do that.
And I think that's where like a lot of my love for the trad bow comes in, because actually when I'm in the woods scouting, I kind of try to put myself in that position. I think in my head, like every scenario, I have a trad bow in my hand. So it's like I have to make this like really critique that like 10 to 15 yard range, no matter what. Like I could go under help my compound, but in my head, I want that setup made for my trad bow.
Yeah, no, it's a great way. Actually, I was talking to my buddy Jason Red at Timber Ninja, and he hunts with a trad bow all the time, and he was talking about that. He's like, it actually simplifies your process of like hunting, when you're hunting with a trad bow, because like this is what your effective range is, and you got to be closer, and it makes you really fine tune your setups and not get lazy with this. This
Yep.
will do because I can shoot 35, 40 yards, that sort of speak.
Yeah. And I see that a lot too. Like I'm out on the public ground scouting and I'll see guys tree stands and they're good areas, but they're not in a good spot.
Hmm.
I mean, they're missing it by like 60 yards. And I don't know if they just don't know any better or if they're just sitting up because they're hunting with a crossbow or what, you know what I mean? But they're just off.
Yeah, definitely. What about so talk a little more about that Ohio season then once you had that encounter there. Now kind of explain how it panned out from there.
Yeah. So I went down for like, I think 8 days or something and hunted the rut and had those couple really good encounters. And then I ended up going back down in gun season. I took my dad with me and uh, he gives me crap for this all the time now because I had like 22 days in a tree down there. I took probably at least 15, 16 scouting trips over the summer down. And he's like, yeah, I'll go down with you. I was like, I'll buy my license to go down with you in gun season. Like, all right, cool. So we go down. He's there for 3 hours and shoots one of the biggest bucks I had on camera all year. I'm like, you have to be kidding me.
Yeah,
You
that's
ever
funny.
meet one of those people that could just throw a worm in a mud puddle and just reel out a great white shark?
Yeah.
That's how he is.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
but I was really happy for him. It was like sub 140, 9 point, had a 6.5 inch drop time. His
Oh
bases were almost
man.
6 inches. His main beams were just under 25 inches. So really good deer, really big deer too. Definitely a 5 year old, probably close to 250 pounds.
Oh man,
But
that's awesome.
so he shot him the first evening that we were there, and the next morning I went out and hunted this area that I'd been getting a really good buck on camera, probably like low 50-inch 10 point, and I played cat and mouse with this thing all year long. He was there, but I don't know if I just probably wasn't there enough hunting. And I know there's a lot of room around the trail cameras, but it just seemed like it goes because he would just show up the most random times, like you would never see it coming or expect it. And I mean, I had some other decent bucks on camera, and I was set up, and I had this decent buck come in, and I watched him, dude, for I don't know, 20 minutes, just debating and debating and debating, and he come to like 30 yards, and I'm like, uh, but I think what it was more was like for the memory, you know what I mean? Like Dad killed that one, we were
Yeah.
together, and I shot that buck. It's more like for the memory because we doubled up.
Yeah.
Because like 5 days after I shot that buck, that big 150 is in a daylight like 4 days in a row down there. So I'm like, that's typical. But
Yeah.
that spot is I don't know if I've heard anybody use the terminology before. I always call them horseshoes. So like there's this ridge system that runs east and west, and the north side is just straight down to a river, and then it has south jutting points. So in between 2 points, you have that like bowl,
Yep.
and I always just call it a horseshoe. It just makes you think of a horseshoe. But actually, what happened is on the way in, I had bumped a deer walking the top trail, and the deer ran onto one of these south points, and it was the point before I got to the point I was hunting. And mid morning, this deer come off of that point and snuck down to the top of the ditch where the ditch started in the bottom, and then he worked his way up the other side to me. So I have about half a mine. It might have been the deer that I bumped, and I find in these horseshoes, or you could use like a saddle. Like I think the saddle would probably be like a really good example too. Is the bigger mature deer won't walk the tops; they stay like down over the lip, so they don't uh, like show themselves in the sunlight or what am I looking for?
Skyline.
Yeah, they want to skyline themselves. They want to
Yep.
stay down over that lip and then work the edge around. And that's what he did, but he just come a little bit lower and just used the ditch basically where the ditch started. He just crossed right above it and just worked that lip up to me. That's all he's doing is crossing from one point to the other.
Nice. That's awesome. And it's pretty cool to be able to double up, with your dad down there during gun
Yeah,
season. Like there's nothing better than being able to do that, especially after a long season. And just it feels good once you're finally able to put your tag on them.
definitely. Yeah.
And then there was a fourth deer too, wasn't there?
Yep. Yeah, I shot another buck in Maryland in gun season.
Okay. So
Yeah,
talk a little bit about that.
that was
Sorry.
actually right before Ohio. Um,
Okay.
so I had taken my fiance out here um in PA for a morning hunt until probably like 9 o'clock, and it was rainy and stuff. So whenever she was done, I told her I was like, "Well, I'm gonna head to Maryland and basically spend all day because I love sneaking with a gun in the rain. Like if it's really windy or rainy, I love that. That's what my favorite style of gun hunting is, just sneaking. And I pretty much planned to be out like all day long. Like I had my pack on, everything with me. I planned on being out all day long. There's like a 3 mile ridge that's got like 5 benches on it, and I'm gonna sneak all day long. And I worked my way down over the first bench, started sneaking, and basically like they're benches, but they roll because there's ditches that cut in between them too. So I would like sneak to the very top and then like peek over and look down in the ditches and then move on. I did that twice, and I seen these tails, and I couldn't tell what way they were going because they happened so fast. So I hear that these like 4 or 5 does come run right at me. I mean, right into my lap, and I just kind of had to sit still because I had nothing around me. There was no big trees. I was standing beside this maple tree like this big around. So I mean, obviously, I'm not hiding anywhere. I'm in orange, and
Yeah.
they come up there and they kind of look at me, and then they run off probably like 10, 15 yards. I'm like, man, there's got to be a buck coming. And I wasn't going to be picky because the rifle season down there, there's people all over the place. And this like rack 8 point comes run up over the hill, and I pull up and shoot. And he kind of like tucks and runs, and I knew I hit him. And right behind him, right after I shot, freaking big one comes running out and stands there, looks at me. I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. So on top of the list of goals for this year, patience is towards the top. Yeah.
Yeah, but hey, like for me, I don't know, when you go to different places and figure it out and be able to shoot really any buck in like those places, like it's just like a stepping stone, like you know what I mean? Like you grow as a hunter when you're able to put it, put notches, I guess, under your belt. Like for me, when I go to different places, my goals and what I want to shoot is different no matter where I go. Like, there's some
Absolutely.
places
Yeah.
I'll be completely happy with any buck that I get an opportunity with, and I'm like, hey, that's awesome. I don't care what his age is, what anything. Like, it's just fun to figure it out, or maybe it's the style of hunting or the people you're with, or then there's some places that I'm like really targeting a big deer, and I'm okay going home with nothing, and that's, I don't know, that's just the way I look at it. Is like I just have, I guess my goals kind of fluctuate depending on where I'm at and the situations, and that's what makes it the most fun for me personally.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, I didn't really have any like super high standard for Maryland because I mean, you get your big ones that come out of Maryland, like on this end anyhow, but I didn't expect to get out and see any monsters or anything. Like I said, it is mainly just to critique my setup in early season, and if I could shoot a decent 8 point or something, awesome. If not, I get my practice in for Ohio is basically what it was.
Yeah, so let's just recap on what would you say like the four different tactics were if you had like from the different bucks, just like a quick, couple sentence recap on each of them.
Yeah, so Maryland in September was definitely the feed trees. That early in the year, I mean, food is king, and that early. And then the PA buck, I kind of classified as bedding because it's really like one of the main things that we focused on was just finding out where he was bedding and why he was bedding there and what he was going to. And that's how I killed it. I got real close to his bed. He come out of his bed down to the first food source. And then I would say probably I call it like just sneaking, like gun sneaking for the second Maryland buck. I really like doing that. Like I said, if it's wet, raining, windy, anything like that. And then the Ohio buck, just basic terrain, just hunting the terrain. I knew there was good bucks using those uh, south jutting points, and I think that horseshoe, learning how they use that was the biggest thing. Because I know there's a guy that actually has a tree stand in there, and it's right on the top, right on the top trail. And as soon as you walk by it, you're like, well, guy's probably not going to see anything. And if he does, he's going to see it way down below him. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And you get into those spots, start following those trails. I mean, you can follow those trails and see what they're doing. I mean, they don't like to be on top. Like you said, they don't like the skyline. They want to be below that lip and stay hidden.
Yeah. No, most definitely. I think that's cool that there's, four completely different things essentially that you used with hunting these deer and being able to successfully do it. And I mean, that's a lot of time that you put in. Like for anybody that's like listening, sounds like, wow, man, that's a great year, $4. And yeah, it is, but you put in a heck of a lot of time too. And then you were rewarded for putting in that time. And do you feel like, I guess right now, with it being at this point in February, are you planning on, going to honing in some of those spots like postseason scouting or like spring scouting, or are you going to start looking at new areas? What's kind of your game plan going into the spring?
Yeah. So, I mean, PA is going to be about the same. I do have some new areas. I've been really breaking down this big section of clear cuts the last couple of weeks, and every day it's nice. I've been out lately. Um, I already actually have a couple of nice bucks on camera right now that are still holding, so I kind of know what I'm looking for already next year. And then obviously I'll fall back and check my spots that are good every single year. Ohio, my game plan is probably more rut based. Like I already know what days were the best. I know that area where those days were hot, I got those days marked, like when those days come in heat. So I know ballpark what day frame I need to be there, and I already have in my head like I'm going to spend 3 4 days in there. You know what I mean? And Maryland, I'm not real sure. I might go back down this year. If I do, it'll be the same area, and I'll be down there checking those feed trees. I got all those dates marked and stuff. Um, Other than that, I mean, Illinois is on my bucket list here really soon. Might not be this year, but I mean, already got my ONX map loaded with pins, so I
Yeah.
already got stuff to look at when I do make it down there. Um, Even thought about doing a North Carolina, like public land early season hunt. I really
Yeah.
like it down there a lot.
Yeah. No, that's
It's
it.
definitely different.
There's some big, I don't know as far as what types of areas you're looking at, but the mountains that are down there in Western North
Mhm.
Carolina, holy cow, they're big. There's some big mountains and have there's actually quite a few listeners of this podcast that live down there, and they've sent in some Mountain Buck Monday posts that are just like jaw dropping, just some
Yeah.
absolute like hammers that they're pulling out of there. And that's like, it's not, I wouldn't say it's the norm. They're working their butts off to find them, and get after them. But it's, yeah, I think that's a cool area. I've only ever driven through it and did some hiking there, but I've never actually hunted those areas.
Yeah, it's definitely different. It's I don't know how to explain it. You ever actually felt real cotton in those fields?
Mm-mm.
No.
No, I
Oh man,
haven't.
every time we go down, I stop along the road and pick like a Walmart bag full of that cotton, and I actually use it for like backup like milkweed. Like
Yeah,
it's real thin. Yeah, I just pull it apart and use that.
that's funny. Well, cool. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on the show here and talking through those stories. I love when I can talk story or like talk to somebody that has stories and then kind of break them down. I feel like it's easier for people to learn. At least I learn better from stories than just like concrete tactics that go out. So
Mm.
I think that's super helpful. And yeah, I'm excited to see what you kind of come up with this year.
Yeah, well, time will tell, I guess.
Yeah. So for anyone that's listening, wants to check out what you have going on, where can people find you and anything that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, so I don't do a lot on my Facebook, but it's just Chris Weist, and then my Instagram is Unleash the Weist, and I'm always putting stuff on my Instagram all the time. I do stories on my scouting trips, and then I make posts periodically. So everything's going to be on my Instagram mainly.
Cool. I'll put links in the show notes for anyone. But yeah, again, thank you so much for coming on, taking time out of your day after working all night. And yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here, man. It's good talking with you.
You too.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.